The recycling bay smelled like burnt metal and old grease. David Reed pulled another broken panel from the disposal chute and tossed it onto the sorting pile. 3 months working on this station and the aliens still treated him like some kind of circus act. They would stop and stare whenever he lifted something heavy or fixed a machine too quickly. Humans were rare out here in council space, and most species seemed to think they were made of glass. "Hey, soft skin," Ralph's voice echoed across the bay. The maintenance supervisor skittered over on his forearms, his insect face clicking with what David had learned was laughter. "Got a present for you." David wiped his hands on his coveralls. "If this is another protein cube prank, I'm not falling for it." "No, no, this is better." Ralph gestured to the other workers gathering near the entrance. They were all grinning, which never meant anything good. "We found something in Cargo Bay 7, thought a fragile human might want a pet." The crowd parted. Two of the larger workers dragged in a metal crate that shook and rattled. Something inside hissed and snarled. David heard the scrape of claws on steel. "What is that?" "Dragon." Ralph's mandibles spread wider. "Little one got loose from a transport ship. They're pests from the volcanic moons. Nasty things. Bite, scratch, breathe fire. But hey, you humans love your little animals, right?" The other workers were already backing away from the crate. David saw fear in their eyes mixed with cruel amusement. They expected him to refuse, to show weakness, to prove their point about humans being too soft for real work. "So you want me to take it?" David asked. "Unless you're scared." Ralph tapped the crate with one arm. "We were going to space it anyway. Regulations say dragons are Class 4 hazards, but if you want to play with it first, be our guest. Just don't come crying when it burns your face off." David looked at the crate. Inside, something moved with jerky, frightened motions. The hissing had stopped. Now he heard something that sounded almost like whimpering. "Fine, I'll take it." The laughter that followed him as he dragged the crate toward his quarters was loud enough to echo down 3 corridors. David ignored it. He had heard worse back on Earth, growing up on the animal rehab farm. People always laughed at the idea of saving the broken things until they saw what those things could become. His quarters were small but private. David sealed the door and set the crate in the center of the room. Through the ventilation slits he could see movement, scales red like fresh rust, a glimpse of teeth. "All right," he said quietly, "let's see what we're dealing with." He didn't open the crate right away. Instead, he went to his food storage and pulled out a piece of the dried meat he had been saving. Real earth beef, expensive as gold this far from home. He broke off a small piece and pushed it through one of the ventilation slits. The creature inside went silent. David waited. A wet nose appeared at the slit, sniffing. Then a tongue, dark and forked, grabbed the meat and pulled it inside. David heard chewing. He pushed another piece through a different slit. This time the dragon came to the new opening faster. David caught a glimpse of an eye, yellow and bright, watching him. "Yeah, you're hungry. When did they last feed you?" He pushed through another piece. "Probably never." He spent the next hour like that, feeding small bits through the slits, letting the dragon get used to his smell and voice. The creature never tried to bite him. It just ate carefully and watched. When the meat was gone, David sat down in front of the crate. "Here's the deal. I can let you out or you can stay in there, but if I let you out, you've got to trust me. I'm not going to hurt you." The dragon made a sound, low and rumbling. Not quite a growl, more like a question. David reached for the latch. The lock released with a click that seemed too loud in the quiet room. He pulled the door open slowly, then backed away to give the dragon space. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a snout poked out, whiskers twitching. The dragon was smaller than David expected, maybe the size of a border collie. Its scales were deep red with darker patterns along the spine. Wings folded tight against its sides. It limped on one front leg. "You're hurt." David stayed sitting, making himself small and non-threatening. "That's why you were scared." The dragon took one step out of the crate, then another. Its injured leg didn't touch the ground properly. An old wound, poorly healed. David didn't move. He just watched as the dragon explored the room, sniffing everything, testing the air with little puffs of smoke that smelled like sulfur. When it came to David, it stopped just out of reach and stared at him with those bright yellow eyes. "I'm David," he said, "and you're going to need a name if you're staying here." The dragon tilted its head. "How about Crimson? You've got the color for it." The dragon, Crimson, took one more step forward and touched David's extended hand with its nose. The scales were warm, almost hot. David stayed perfectly still as Crimson sniffed his fingers, his sleeve, his chest. Then, as if making a decision, the dragon settled down on the floor next to him and closed its eyes. David let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. Outside his door, he could hear the station's normal sounds. Workers laughing about the stupid human and his death wish. Bets being placed on how long he would last before the dragon attacked. But in here, in the quiet of his quarters, David felt something he hadn't felt since leaving Earth. A connection, a beginning. He reached out slowly and touched the dragon's head. Crimson's eyes opened slightly, watching, but the creature didn't pull away. "Yeah," David said softly, "we're going to show them, all of them." The dragon's tail curled around David's leg, warm and solid, and for the first time since arriving on this station, David Reed smiled. Crimson's injured leg needed attention. David examined it carefully on the second morning, running his fingers along the old break that had healed crooked. The dragon flinched but didn't pull away. Trust was building, slow and fragile. "I can't fix this completely," David told him, feeling the misaligned bone under the scales. "But I can make it better." He fashioned a brace from spare parts in the maintenance bay, soft padding inside hard support struts. Getting it on Crimson took patience and 3 tries, but the dragon seemed to understand it helped. Within days, the limp was less pronounced. Word spread fast through the station. The human hadn't been eaten. Worse, he was keeping the dragon, walking it, training it. Station Commander Horvath summoned David to his office on the 5th day. The reptilian officer sat behind a desk too small for his bulk, eyes cold and unblinking. "This is irregular," Horvath said, his translator converting the hisses into flat words. "Dragons are classified as vermin, dangerous vermin. You understand this puts other residents at risk." David stood at attention. "Sir, Crimson hasn't shown any aggression. He's intelligent and learning quickly." Horvath's claws clicked on the desk. "Not. It is an animal, a dangerous one." "With respect, Commander, so were dogs once. And horses. Humans have a history of working with species others feared." Horvath leaned back, his long neck curved in what might have been amusement or irritation. "You have 7 days. Prove this creature is safe, controllable, and useful. If you cannot, it gets spaced, and you face disciplinary action for endangering station personnel." 7 days. David returned to his quarters where Crimson waited, curled on the makeshift bed David had built from old cushions. The dragon's head lifted when he entered, tail thumping once against the floor. "We've got a week," David said. "Time to show them what you can do." He started with basic commands. Sit, stay, come. Crimson picked them up faster than any dog David had trained back on Earth. The dragon's eyes tracked every movement, every gesture. When David rewarded correct behavior with treats, Crimson would rumble with pleasure, smoke puffing from his nostrils. But intelligence went both ways. On the 3rd day of training, David was teaching Crimson to fetch. He threw a ball down the corridor outside his quarters. Crimson bounded after it, grabbed it in his jaws, then stopped halfway back. The dragon set the ball down, looked at David, and pushed it with his nose. It rolled back to David's feet. "Did you just problem solve?" David laughed. "You figured out an easier way." Crimson's head tilted, pleased with himself. They attracted attention during practice sessions. Workers would stop and watch from safe distances as David put Crimson through commands. The dragon never faltered, never showed aggression, never lost focus. Ralph appeared on the 5th day, his mandibles clicking nervously. "The commander wants a demonstration. Tomorrow, public." "We'll be ready." "Look human, David," Ralph shifted on his forearms. Some of us have bets riding on this. Don't make me lose credits. You bet on me. I bet against you at first, but then I switched. He gestured at Crimson, who was watching him with alert eyes. That thing learns too fast. It's not natural. He's just smart, and his name is Crimson. The demonstration took place in the station's central plaza. Horvath sat on a raised platform with several council representatives who happened to be visiting. Bad timing or perfect timing, depending on how things went. Half the station's population crowded the space. David saw fear in their faces, excitement in others. Some wanted him to fail, some wanted to see something new. Crimson sat at David's side, calm despite the noise and crowd. David had worked with him on this, getting him used to chaos and strangers. Begin when ready, Horvath announced. David took Crimson through the basics first. Sit, stay, come, heal, perfect execution. Then more complex commands, fetch specific objects from a pile, move to designated spots on command. Wait while David walked away even when other people moved around him. Crimson performed flawlessly. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Then Horvath stood. This proves nothing. Tricks are not safety. What happens when it feels threatened, when its nature takes over? David had expected this. Permission to demonstrate threat response. Horvath's eyes narrowed. Granted. David signaled to Ralph, who had agreed to help despite his nerves. The supervisor approached Crimson from behind, making aggressive noises and waving his arms. Crimson's head swung around, his body tensed. Smoke leaked from his nostrils. The crowd gasped and stepped back. Easy, David said quietly. Stand down. Crimson looked at him, then back at Ralph, then at David again. The smoke stopped. The dragon sat down and turned his attention to David, ignoring Ralph completely. Now approach me, David told Ralph. The supervisor moved toward David in the same threatening manner. This time Crimson reacted differently. He stepped between them, not attacking, just positioning himself as a barrier. A low growl rumbled in his chest, but he didn't advance. He waited for David's command. Down, David said. Crimson dropped to a crouch immediately. Show's over, Ralph, thanks. The supervisor backed away quickly, relief obvious in his movements. David turned to Horvath. He knows the difference between play, threat, and danger. He responds to commands even when stressed, and he prioritizes protection over aggression. One of the council representatives, a floating jellyfish-like being, spoke in chiming tones. Remarkable. We have seen military animals with less discipline. How long did this training take? 6 days. The plaza erupted in shocked whispers. 6 days to train a creature considered untamable. Horvath studied Crimson for a long moment. The dragon may remain, conditional status. You are responsible for its behavior, human, any incident, any injury. And it dies, understood. Understood, Commander. As the crowd dispersed, David knelt next to Crimson and scratched behind his ear ridges. The dragon leaned into the touch, eyes half closed. Good boy, David whispered. We did it. Crimson's tail wrapped around his arm, warm and steady. That night, David filed his official report. But he also started something else, a journal documenting Crimson's learning, behavior, and intelligence. The data was extraordinary. Crimson wasn't just smart for an animal. He showed reasoning that rivaled some sapient species. David fell asleep with Crimson curled at the foot of his bed, the dragons breathing slow and even. Outside, the station hummed with new gossip. The human and his dragon, the impossible partnership. In his office, Horvath read David's report twice. Then he marked Crimson's file with a special notation, one reserved for cases requiring observation. The dragon was learning too fast, understanding too much. This was either going to be very good or very bad. Time would tell which. The alarm wasn't the normal shift change bell. This sound was sharp, urgent, designed to cut through walls and sleep and complacency. David's eyes snapped open as red emergency lights flooded his quarters. All personnel, this is Commander Horvath. We are under attack. Hostile boarders have breached sectors 4 and 7. Security teams engage. All civilians shelter in place. Crimson was already on his feet, wings half spread, eyes bright with alertness. The dragon had grown in the past 3 weeks. Now he stood as tall as David's chest, his wingspan nearly touching both walls of the small quarters. David grabbed his work tablet and pulled up the station schematic. Sector 4 was residential. Sector 7 was maintenance, where most of his coworkers would be starting their shifts. Red dots bloomed across the display, showing breach points and firefights. "We're in Sector 6, he muttered, "right between them." The station shuddered, explosions somewhere above them. Screaming filtered through the ventilation system, high-pitched and terrified. David's door chimed. He opened it to find Ralph and a group of maintenance workers, several of them injured. Blood, various colors, dripped on the corridor floor. "They're cutting through the lower levels," Ralph's voice shook. "Security is pinned down. We need to get to the shelter pods in Sector 3. "That's across the main junction." David checked his tablet. "It's crawling with hostiles." "Then we die here or die trying." David looked at Crimson. The dragon stared back, waiting for direction. In 3 weeks, they had built something deeper than training, understanding, partnership. "Can you fight?" David asked quietly. Crimson's answer was a rumble deep in his chest, and a small jet of flame that scorched the air. "All right," David turned to the group. "Stay behind me and Crimson. Move quiet, move fast. If shooting starts, hit the deck." They moved through the corridors like ghosts. David led with Crimson at his side, the dragon's claws silent on the metal floor despite his size. The workers followed in a tight cluster, supporting their injured. The first group of pirates appeared at Junction 42. 4 of them, armored and armed, tearing into a storage locker. Krill raiders, their insectoid bodies covered in combat plates. David signaled everyone to stop. He touched Crimson's shoulder and pointed. The dragon saw them and tensed. "Wait for my mark," David whispered. The pirates were focused on their looting. One of them pulled out a container of something valuable and chittered to the others. They never heard Crimson coming. David gave the signal with a slash of his hand. Crimson exploded forward, a red blur of muscle and wings. He hit the first pirate like a missile, claws raking across armor, finding joints and weak points. The raider went down screaming. The others turned, weapons rising, but Crimson was already moving. A gout of flame caught one full in the face, melting his helmet. The third tried to run and made it 3 steps before the dragon's tail whipped around and slammed him into the wall. The fourth got a shot off. The energy bolt burned across Crimson's shoulder, scoring scales. The dragon roared, a sound that shook the corridor, and pounced. It was over in seconds. David ran forward, checking Crimson's wound. Burned, but not deep. The dragon was already moving again, scanning for more threats. "By the void," one of the workers whispered. "It fights like a trained soldier." "He fights like someone protecting his family," David corrected. "Come on, we're not safe yet." They made it 2 more junctions before running into real trouble. A group of civilians, mostly maintenance staff and shop workers, pinned down in a dining area by at least a dozen pirates. The raiders were taking there time, enjoying the fear, discussing which captives might be worth ransom. David counted heads, 20 civilians including younglings, no weapons among them. The pirates had them completely controlled. "We can't leave them," Ralph said. "I know," David studied the layout. "Crimson and I will draw them off. When they chase us, you get everyone to the shelter pods." "That's suicide." "It's a chance." David looked at his dragon. "You with me?" Crimson's eyes blazed with understanding and determination. He lowered his head so David could grab the ridge of scales at his neck. "On 3. They burst into the dining area like an explosion. David had grabbed a piece of pipe from a broken conduit, not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. Crimson led the charge, wings spread wide, making himself look even larger. The pirates turned in confusion. In that moment of hesitation, Crimson breathed fire across their front line. Not to kill, just to scatter them, give the civilians a chance to run. It worked. The captives bolted for the exit while the pirates scrambled away from the flames. But then the raiders realized there were only two attackers, a human and a dragon. "Take them," the pirate leader shouted in broken station standard. 12 armed raiders against one man and one dragon. Bad odds. David swung his pipe at the nearest attacker, connecting with a crack. Crimson was everywhere at once, biting, clawing, breathing fire in controlled bursts. But there were too many. A raider got behind Crimson and fired point-blank into his side. The dragon screamed and stumbled. David felt his heart drop. "No," he threw himself at the raider, pure rage driving him. They went down together, rolling across the floor. David felt ribs crack, wasn't sure if they were his or the pirates'. Then Crimson was there, wounded but fighting, pulling raiders off David with his jaws. The dragon's blood mixed with the pirates on the floor. They fought back-to-back, human and dragon, against impossible numbers. A weapon discharge near David's head left his ears ringing. Crimson's tail swept 3 raiders off their feet. David's pipe found another helmet, another joint in armor. They were losing, being overwhelmed by numbers and firepower. Then security arrived. Station Marines poured into the dining area, weapons blazing. The pirates broke and ran. The Marines didn't pursue, too busy securing the civilians and treating. Wounded. David collapsed against the wall, everything hurting. Crimson limped over and pressed against him, both of them breathing hard. The dragon had burns and cuts across his body. One wing hung at an odd angle. "You stupid, brave, wonderful dragon," David gasped, running his hands over Crimson's wounds. "You could have died." Crimson just rumbled and licked David's face with his hot tongue. Commander Horvath appeared through the smoke, his own armor scorched and dented. He looked at David and Crimson, then at the unconscious pirates, then at the grateful civilians being led to safety. "Reports," he demanded. "We saved them, sir," David said simply. Horvath's eyes studied Crimson for a long moment. The dragon stared back, no longer the small, scared creature from the crate. Now he was a warrior, proven in fire and blood. "Get to medical, both of you," Horvath's voice was gruff, "and human, good work." As medical teams helped them to the infirmary, David heard the whispers spreading through the station. The human and his dragon had fought pirates, had saved lives, had become something more than a joke or a curiosity. They had become heroes. Recovery took 2 weeks. Crimson's wounds healed faster than the medical staff expected, his dragon physiology knitting tissue and bone at remarkable speed. David's cracked ribs and burns took longer, but he refused to stay in bed. There was too much happening. The pirate attack had changed everything. Station news feeds played footage from security cameras over and over. Crimson fighting with precision and courage. David coordinating civilians while injured. The moment they stood back-to-back against overwhelming odds. Messages poured in from across the station. Thanks, questions, requests. "They want to meet him," David told Crimson as he read through his tablet. "Everyone wants to meet the dragon who saved their lives." Crimson, stretched across 3 beds they had pushed together in the medical bay, just yawned and showed his teeth. He was bigger now, stress and combat having triggered another growth spurt. His wings could no longer fold completely against his sides in small rooms. Commander Horvath visited on the 10th day. He brought someone new, a tall being covered in crystalline growths that refracted light into rainbows. Council Representative Quill, according to the introduction. "Your dragon is causing considerable discussion in Council." "Chambers," Quill said, their voice like wind chimes. "Dragons are classified as dangerous fauna, yet this one shows intelligence and loyalty beyond most registered companion species." "Crimson is special," David agreed. "Is he, or are all dragons special, and we simply never bothered to find out?" Quill moved closer to Crimson, who watched them with alert eyes. "How many have we exterminated because we were too afraid to try understanding?" Horvath crossed his arms. The Council wants to run tests, measure cognitive ability, test responses, evaluate threat levels. No, David's response was immediate. He's not a lab animal. He's not legally a person either, Quill said gently. That is the problem we face. To protect him, to protect others like him, we need proof. Scientific proof that dragons are sapient beings deserving of rights. David looked at Crimson. The dragon met his gaze and something passed between them. Understanding, trust. What kind of tests? They started small. Puzzle-solving exercises that Crimson completed faster than most Council species. Pattern recognition tests where he achieved perfect scores. Communication trials where he demonstrated understanding of complex commands and even learned to respond with specific gestures. The xenobiologists were astonished. One of them, a small furry being named Pip, spent hours just watching Crimson play with logic puzzles. Wait, David reminded himself, not Pip. The scientist's name was something else, Dr. Fillion Wright. This is extraordinary, Dr. Fillion said, recording Crimson solving a mechanical puzzle designed for species with hands. The dragon used his claws, teeth, and tail in combination, showing problem-solving flexibility. His spatial reasoning exceeds baseline requirements for sapience classification. But the Council needed more than test scores. They needed real-world demonstration. Horvath proposed an idea during a meeting in his office. The station needs better security. The pirate attack proved our vulnerabilities. What if we trained more dragons, created a security force that could respond to threats? You want to weaponize them? David said flatly. I want to give them purpose and protection. Horvath pulled up files on his display. There are 17 dragons currently held in containment across this sector, awaiting extermination. If you can prove they can be trained like Crimson, I can argue for their transfer here for a trial program. David thought about it. 17 lives, 17 dragons like Crimson, scared and alone, waiting to die. I'll need help, space, resources. You'll have it. The first dragon arrived 3 days later, smaller than Crimson, blue-scaled and terrified, missing half her tail. David approached the transport crate the same way he had with Crimson. Patience, food, calm voice. Her name became Azure. Within a week, she was responding to basic commands. Within 2, she and Crimson were inseparable, the larger red dragon teaching the smaller blue one everything he knew. More dragons came, green-scaled forest, golden bright, black-scaled shadow, each with their own trauma, their own fears. Each learning to trust, to respond, to become more than wild animals. David worked 18-hour days, teaching, training, building bonds. Crimson helped, demonstrating to the others, showing them that humans could be trusted. The younger dragons watched him like students watching a teacher. Ralph became David's assistant, overcoming his fear to help with feeding and basic care. Other station workers volunteered. The program grew. 6 months after the pirate attack, David stood in what used to be an empty cargo bay and watched 12 dragons run through coordinated exercises. Formations, emergency response drills, search and rescue simulations. They moved like a unit, communicating with each other through sounds and gestures David was still learning to interpret. Crimson led them, the largest and oldest, his authority unquestioned. Commander Horvath brought council representatives to observe. They watched in silence as the dragons demonstrated everything from crowd control to disaster response to combat readiness. They're not just trained, one representative whispered. They're organized, they have hierarchy, culture. Representative Quill turned to David. How many commands can they understand? Over 300 distinct instructions, but it's more than that. They improvise, they make decisions, they protect each other. David called out to Crimson, who trotted over with Azure at his side. They're people, just not the kind we're used to. The council debate lasted 3 weeks. David gave testimony. Dr. Fillion presented research. Horvath submitted security reports showing decreased response times and increased safety ratings. dozens of station residents spoke about the dragons who had saved them during the attack. The vote came down to a single representative's decision. Council species status, limited but real. Dragons could no longer be exterminated as pests. They had rights, protection, recognition. David received the news in the Dragon Bay, surrounded by the pack he had built. Crimson pressed against his side, now so large that David barely came up to his shoulder when the dragon stood at full height. "We did it," David told them all. "You're safe now, all of you." Crimson's rumble was echoed by 11 other dragons. The sound shook the bay, a chorus of relief and triumph. But that night, alone in his quarters with Crimson barely fitting through the door anymore, David received a different message. From council worlds across 3 sectors, from wildlife preserves and containment facilities and even wild colonies. They all wanted the same thing. Could David help their dragons too? He looked at Crimson, who watched him with those intelligent yellow eyes. "This is bigger than us now," David said. "This is all of them, every dragon, everywhere." Crimson's tail thumped against the floor. Agreement, purpose. The legend was just beginning. The frontier world was called Haven, though it had been anything but when David first arrived. Barren rock, thin atmosphere, barely habitable even with domed settlements. But it had 2 things going for it: isolation from council bureaucracy and massive cave systems perfect for dragons. 2 years had passed since the council vote. 2 years of building, teaching, rescuing. The station program had been just the beginning. David walked through the main cavern complex, Crimson at his side as always. The dragon had reached his full size now, massive and magnificent. His wingspan stretched nearly 40 feet when fully extended. Scars from the pirate fight marked his scales like badges of honor. Around them, the sanctuary bustled with life. 63 dragons called Haven home, each rescued from extermination orders or abusive conditions. They ranged from hatchlings barely bigger than house cats to ancients whose scales had faded to pale pastels. "The transport from Rigel Sector arrives in 3 hours, Ralph said, skittering up with a data pad. The old supervisor had followed David here, leaving his station job to become Haven's operations manager. 7 more dragons, all young, 1 is injured. Get medical ready. I'll handle the intake personally." "You always do," Ralph's mandibles clicked with amusement. "You know we have staff for this now, right? Trained handlers. You don't have to greet every arrival." "Yes, I do." David watched a group of adolescent dragons playing in the open training yard, supervised by Azure and Forest. "They need to know someone cares, that this place is different." The sanctuary had grown beyond anything David imagined that first day with Crimson. They had medical facilities, training grounds, research labs, even a school where dragons learned everything from basic language to complex problem-solving. Species from across council space came to study, to learn the methods David had developed. But it wasn't just about training anymore. It was about culture, understanding. Dragons had their own social structures, their own ways of communicating, their own intelligence that humans were only beginning to understand. Dr. Fillion worked in the research center, compiling years of behavioral data. The proof was overwhelming now. Dragons were sapient. They had language, though it operated differently than most species. They had art, expressing themselves through carefully controlled flame patterns and aerial dances. They had family bonds that lasted lifetimes. A young dragon, barely a year old, bounded up to David with something in her jaws. She dropped a broken piece of equipment at his feet, head tilted hopefully. "You want me to fix it, Spark?" David picked up the device, some kind of puzzle toy. "All right, let's see what we can do." He sat on a convenient boulder, Crimson settling beside him while Spark watched with eager attention. As David worked on the toy, other dragons drifted over. This was common now, dragons seeking out humans not for orders but for interaction, for the simple pleasure of being together. A delegation arrived midday. Council officials, military observers, even reporters from 3 different news networks. They came regularly now, documenting the miracle happening on Haven. David gave them the standard tour, the nursery where hatchlings learned basic skills, the medical wing where injured dragons received treatment, the training grounds where security dragons practiced coordinated operations, the art cavern where dragons created flame murals of stunning complexity. Remarkable, one official murmured, watching an elderly dragon paint with controlled fire. We nearly made them extinct. Many species did, David said quietly, on hundreds of worlds, because we were afraid of what we didn't understand. Representative Quill had come with the delegation. The crystalline being studied everything with careful attention. The council is considering a new proposal, Quill said during a private meeting in David's office. Dragon protection worlds, habitats across council space where they can live freely with support and resources. Your sanctuary would be the model. That's good, great even, David leaned back in his chair, but it's not enough. What do you mean? Protection is important, but what about integration? Dragons are sapient beings. They should have the same opportunities as any other species. Education, jobs, representation. You want dragons on the council? Another official laughed. They can't even speak standard languages. They communicate perfectly well. We're just not listening. David pulled up recordings on his display. Look, this is Shadow coordinating a rescue operation during last month's earthquake in Sector 9. He's giving complex instructions to his team, adapting strategy in real time, making command decisions. That's not animal behavior. That's leadership. Crimson, lying in the corner of the office, raised his head and rumbled agreement. Several officials jumped. They still weren't comfortable around dragons, even after seeing the sanctuary. Change takes time, Quill said diplomatically. But it is happening. 3 years ago, dragons were vermin. Now they are recognized beings with rights. In another 3 years, who knows? After the delegation left, David walked out to the observation platform that overlooked the main valley. Dozens of dragons flew in the late afternoon light, their scales catching the sun. Red, blue, green, gold, black, purple, every color imaginable. Crimson joined him, settling onto the platform with a satisfied rumble. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the dragons play and hunt and live. "Do you remember that crate?" David asked. "How scared you were, how small." Crimson's tail wrapped around David's waist, gentle despite its massive size. "Look at what we built, what you helped build." David scratched behind Crimson's ear ridge, that same spot that had made the dragon relax on their first night together. "Every dragon down there alive and free because you trusted me. Because you showed them it was possible." A message chimed on David's comm. He read it and smiled. 3 more sanctuaries are opening next quarter, 1 on each of the core worlds. They want you to visit, meet their dragons, share what you know. Crimson rumbled, a questioning sound. "Yeah, we'll go, of course we'll go." David leaned against his dragon's warm scales. "This is bigger than Haven now, bigger than us. Dragons are coming back, Crim, really coming back." A young reporter had asked David that morning what his goal was, what he hoped to achieve. David hadn't known how to explain it then, but now, watching dragons dance in the fading light, he understood. It wasn't about training or taming or control. It was never about that. It was about seeing the potential in what others dismissed, about building bridges instead of walls, about proving that fear could become friendship, that the unwanted could become treasured. Crimson shifted beside him, comfortable and content. The dragon who had been a cruel joke was now the foundation of a revolution, the symbol of a species reclaiming their place in the galaxy. David's comm chimed again, and again, and again. More requests, more dragons needing help, more worlds wanting sanctuaries. "Ready for another adventure?" he asked Crimson. The dragon's answer was a gout of flame that lit up the darkening sky, visible for miles. A beacon, a declaration. They were just getting started. 5 years changes everything. 5 years turns impossibilities into normal life. transforms legends into daily routine, makes miracles mundane. David stood at the landing pad, watching the transport ship descend through Haven's atmosphere. His hair had more gray now, lines around his eyes from squinting into bright skies. His hands bore scars from 1,000 small injuries, the kind you got from working closely with creatures that breathed fire and had claws like knives. Crimson waited beside him, patient and massive. The dragon's scales had deepened to a rich burgundy with age, some of them marked with silver where old wounds had healed. He was enormous now, one of the largest dragons in the sanctuary, but he still leaned into David's touch like he had that first night in a cramped station quarters. The transport doors opened. Ralph emerged first, followed by a group of young handlers from 3 different species, all trained at Haven's academy. Behind them came the cargo, 20 crates of various sizes, each containing a rescued dragon. "Rough trip?" David asked. "The usual." Ralph's mandibles clicked with tired amusement. 2 crates got damaged during loading, minor injuries only. The big surprise came from crate 7, look. He led David to a large container. Inside, barely visible through the ventilation slits, something gold gleamed. She was scheduled for extermination on a mining colony. They said she killed 2 workers. Ralph's voice dropped. But the workers had been using shock prods on her, torturing her for entertainment. David felt the familiar anger rise. 5 years and it still hit him every time. How casual the cruelty could be. "Let's get her out." They moved all the crates to the intake facility, a large space designed specifically for helping traumatized dragons adjust. David worked through each one, evaluating injuries, assessing temperament, making notes. The process took hours. The golden dragon came last. When they opened her crate, she exploded out with a roar, wings flaring, fire jetting in all directions. The handlers scattered. David held his ground, Crimson beside him. "Easy," David said in the calm voice he had perfected over 5 years. "Nobody's hurting you here." The golden dragon's eyes were wild, terrified. She was young, maybe 2 years old, but already scarred across her flanks and wings. Shock prod burns. David recognized them. Crimson stepped forward, placing himself between David and the frightened dragon. He didn't threaten, didn't attack. He just stood there, massive and calm, and made a low sound in his throat. Dragon speech, the complex combination of rumbles and harmonics that humans were still learning to understand. The golden dragon stopped, her head tilted, listening. Crimson spoke again, longer this time. His tail swayed in a pattern David recognized as reassurance. Slowly, carefully, the golden dragon's wings folded. Her fire stopped. She looked at Crimson, then at David, then back at Crimson. "That's it," David said softly. "You're safe now, I promise." She collapsed, exhausted and overwhelmed. Crimson moved to her side, using his bulk to create a protective barrier. David approached slowly, checking her injuries, his hands gentle despite her flinching. "You're going to be okay," he told her. "We'll call you Goldie until you're ready to tell us your real name." 3 days later, Goldie was following Crimson around like a shadow, learning the sanctuary's routines. By the end of the week, she was playing with the other young dragons, her fear slowly replaced by cautious hope. David documented it all like he documented everything. The data filled servers now. 5 years of research, behavior studies, communication analysis, medical records. Proof that dragons were not only sapient, but possessed intelligence and emotional complexity that rivaled any council species. The sanctuary had become famous. Ships arrived daily with visitors, students, researchers. Other sanctuaries had opened across council space, all using David's methods. Dragon populations were recovering on their homeworlds. Some colonies had even begun diplomatic relations with nearby settlements. Commander Horvath visited for the anniversary celebration. The old reptilian walked slower now, using a support cane, but his eyes were still sharp. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, watching dragons and handlers work together in the training yard. "When you kept that creature in your quarters, I thought you were insane." His name is Crimson, David corrected with a smile. And you gave me the chance to prove everyone wrong. You did that yourself. Horvath gestured to the valley where over 200 dragons now lived. All of this, it's remarkable. Ralph appeared with news. The council vote is in, full sapient status. Dragons are now recognized as a council species with all rights and privileges. The announcement spread through the sanctuary like wildfire. Dragons roared their triumph, flames lighting up the afternoon sky. Handlers cheered. Even the normally reserved scientists joined the celebration. But David just sat down on a bench, suddenly tired. Crimson settled beside him, head resting on David's lap. "We did it," David whispered. 5 years ago you were a joke, a prank, something they expected to kill me." Crimson rumbled, deep and satisfied. That evening, as the celebration continued, David walked to the memorial garden. They had built it in the second year, a place to remember all the dragons they couldn't save. Thousands of names carved into stone, species lost to fear and ignorance. Crimson followed, always following, his shadow in the fading light. "I think about them sometimes," David said, touching one of the stones. "All the dragons that died before we understood, before we tried." A young handler approached, one of the new graduates. Human from Earth, drawn to Haven by stories of the man and his dragon. "Sir, we have another transport incoming. Emergency rescue from the outer colonies. 30 dragons, all critical condition." David sighed and stood. The work never stopped. Every saved dragon meant 10 more that needed help. "Get medical ready. I'll be there in 5 minutes." As the handler ran off, David looked at Crimson, the dragon who had changed everything, who had shown the galaxy, what was possible when you chose understanding over fear. "One more rescue?" David asked. Crimson's answer was to spread his wings, magnificent and powerful. David climbed onto his back, settling into the familiar ridges and scales. They had done this hundreds of times now, flying together over Haven's valleys. They took off into the sunset, dragon and human, partners and friends. Below them, the sanctuary thrived with life that had once been condemned to death. Above them, the stars beckoned with more worlds, more dragons, more chances to change minds and save lives. The joke had become a legend. The legend had become a revolution. And the revolution had become a new normal, where dragons and humans worked side by side, building something better than what came before. Crimson roared as they flew, his voice echoing across the valley. Not a challenge or a threat, but a declaration of joy and freedom. And David, the maintenance worker who had been given a monster as a prank, laughed with pure happiness as they soared higher, into the gathering twilight, ready for whatever came next. Because the work was never finished. The galaxy was vast, and there were always more dragons who needed someone to believe in them, to see their worth, to give them a chance. David Reed and Crimson had shown the way. Now it was up to the rest of the galaxy to follow.